Okay, thank you all for joining us. Columbian is pleased candidates for Secretary of State and the editorial page editor. And we'll do other introductions. Craig?
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the Columbian's editor. Thanks for joining us today.
And Ben?
Ben Campbell, publisher of the Columbian and newest editorial board member.
And Callie?
Hi, I'm Callie Hare. I cover politics for the Columbian, and I'll be covering and writing about this meeting, but I won't be participating or asking questions.
And then we'll move on to the candidates. Please take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves, explain why you are running for this position, and then we'll move on to specific policy questions. And we'll start with Gail.
Thanks so much for organizing this interview. Really great to have the opportunity to speak to your audience, to your readers, about what is happening in our country today and in Washington State. I am running for Secretary of State because I decided in 2016, when we got alerts that the Russians were interfering in our elections, that I was going to spend the next 3.5 years in the legislature making sure I was doing everything we could with my colleagues to secure our elections against foreign interference. I declared for this office in December of 2019, and since that time, I am still running for this office, not only to protect against foreign interference, which is still underway, bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed that, but that we now have domestic attacks on our elections. I never thought I would live to see this day, that our democracy was at risk by our own president attacking voting by mail, attacking the U.S. Postal Service for the last nearly 6 months. And now we have the Postal Service disrupted, literally mail sorting machines, mail processing centers closed, mail sorting machines removed, blue collection boxes being removed, and we had to have a lawsuit filed against the Trump administration to find out exactly where the disruption exists. I have been running for Secretary of State, but it's not my first job in political office. I was a Port of Seattle commissioner for 5 years before being elected to the legislature in 2012, and I've been serving since 2013. I worked at the University of Washington for 8.5 years during my tenure as a port commissioner, and prior to running for office, I also served in the private sector, a large science and technology company, after the Cold War ended, where we were implementing, and I was running our businesses in Russia and Ukraine. And before all of that, I am a product of the Cold War. I was a senior defense intelligence analyst briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Soviet nuclear threats to the United States through the 1980s. We are in an unprecedented time. We have never had an election where both foreign and domestic threats are undermining the potential for us to carry out elections safely. Our Secretary of State has not addressed these attacks to the U.S. Postal Service or to our voting by mail for months, and we need a different approach to address the threats of the future. I look forward to the discussion today. We have so much at stake in these elections. Protecting every vote, protecting every voter, carrying out an election through a pandemic or through foreign attacks and domestic attacks. This is who we are as a democracy. This is who we are as a people. We will get the job done.
Thank you. And Kim?
Yes, thanks so much for having this today. Back in the late 1980s, my husband and I lived in Germany when he served in the Army, and we received our ballots for an election the day after the election. And that became a real defining moment for my professional development because a few years later, I became the elections director for Thurston County. And I made a commitment to myself that no person in my charge would have that experience, and that I would protect the voting rights of everyone that I served every single day. And I've done that for the last 27 years as a Thurston County auditor and now Secretary of State as well. And those early lessons as an election administrator really taught me that I needed to learn the profession. I'm nationally and state certified as an election administrator, and I have experience running over 120 elections. And this experience, I think, has really prepared me well for 2020 and the challenges that we've had with COVID, with social unrest, with natural disasters. So we are poised and ready. We've been working very hard over the last 4 years to beef up our cybersecurity defenses responses and prepare for this election. And I look forward to this editorial board.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks again, both of you, for joining us. Let's start with there obviously has been much discussion about election security, including vote by mail. Gail, is Washington's system secure?
Voting by mail is the most secure election system in the country, and it's really a shame that we didn't have the opportunities through our Secretary of State's office to really expand opportunities for every state to adopt a greater percentage of their vote by mail when the pandemic hit back in March. Donald Trump started.
What can a single state secretary do about that?
Work with their colleagues. Our Secretary of State chaired the Republican Secretary of State's Leadership Council in 2018 and served on it prior to that. It would have been a great opportunity for her to convene with her Republican Secretaries of State and the National Association of Secretaries of State and say, what does it take to deal with a pandemic as well as foreign interference, which we were already alerted to the fact that that was happening. And, you use the power of your office to help persuade people around the country to adopt what are safe and secure methods of voting for all of our people. I did that as a legislator. I did it as a port commissioner. When we found ways of expanding opportunities for trade and export markets for our companies in this state, we worked with our ports around the country to make sure our ports were secure after the 9/11 attacks. And as a legislator, I've done the same thing on any number of fronts, on education funding, on climate policy and clean energy policy. This is what we do in Washington State if we have the ability to show how we do it here safely and securely. And so I would really have loved to see that expanded. The Russians are still attacking. Microsoft just confirmed it. The Senate Intelligence Committee just confirmed it. It is different than the 2016 attacks, and we need to pay very serious attention to where the risks actually exist in our elections equipment, systems, networks, and our voter data.
Kim, are we paying enough attention to that?
Yes, I believe we are. That was a lot. So, this really sums up the contrast that we have in this election and this race. First, I would start with what we do here in Washington State as a national model, and I'm really proud to be a part of building out our current system and being an architect of implementing the laws that have been passed over the last 27 years related to elections. And we have built arguably the safest, the most accessible, and the most secure election system in the country. And I just have a different approach than my opponent to how I use the office. So what we've been doing here since March, when we were in the middle of our presidential primary and the pandemic hit, we've been working with states across the country, and I, between my election director and I, we have spoken to every single state in this country, including the District of Columbia. We have been trying to be part of the solution and working with members of Congress, trying to have the discussion of the merits of expanding absentee voting or vote by mail elections. But to actually just really move completely to vote by mail elections was not possible in the time that was allocated without a great infusion of money and resources to get states that have 3 to 5% of their ballots returned by mail to be to a higher level. They're still going to be between 50 and 70% of their ballots returned by mail. And we really wanted Congress to put in more money, and it would have been probably $3 to $4 billion of an investment. And unfortunately, the partisan rankering between that White House and Congress and within Congress slowed that down, and the missed opportunity happened. So but make no mistake, we are working very hard and diligently on maintaining our cybersecurity defenses. We have plans to respond and recover if we have an event. We have continuity of operation plans that our counties and we have worked on to make sure that we're ready. And we've been preparing for this election for well over 2 years.
Gail, is it realistic to suggest that other states should be all vote by mail when they've had smaller instances of that?
There are two things that we all need to pay attention to. All other states have vote by mail in some form. They have absentee ballots. The importance of working with the states where their largest counties would have the opportunity to move from absentee ballots expansion to statewide absentee ballots was an important opportunity. We could have coordinated with those states where there was the largest percentage of absentee voting already going on and help them expand that. I think what I also want to talk about as a second point, it's not okay to stand up in the middle of a pandemic or when we know that the president has started attacking our voting by mail, calling it rigged elections. Attorney General Barr did the same thing. It has an effect on our voters too. Our voters need to know that we are standing up to protect our right to vote in this state. And when we stand up and protect the right to vote in other states, what we're showing those other states is there is a way to navigate through these kinds of disruptions and these kinds of risks. And only secretaries of state have that bully pulpit. When the Secretary of State in this state does not talk with her colleagues who are actively removing ballot boxes, filing lawsuits to prevent voter use of absentee ballots and making it more difficult for them to use absentee ballots, it is not supporting expansion of access to the right to vote for either our voters or voters around the country. We're responsible for defending our right to vote here in this state, and every elected official should be doing that, regardless of the position we hold, because when our right to vote is at risk, all of our rights are at risk.
Kim, do you think you've adequately stood up for that?
I do. And again, I think this is just a very different approach and style. I've been doing this work, and my job is to inspire confidence in everyone across the political spectrum, not just my political party. And that's what I do every day in the job. And so, yes, I do choose my words carefully on how we should proceed. For example, it's easy to throw out, we could just switch counties or switch local jurisdictions or big urban areas to vote by mail. But having done the work, I would point to Washington's experience. First of all, we started ramping up our absentee voting, as you know, in the early 1990s. By the late 1990s, we were roughly 60% of our voters were voting by mail by choice. By 2005, after the governor's race, we gave counties the opportunity to switch to vote by mail. And it still took our state 5 years to ramp up to vote by mail completely, because it takes time to build out the capacity and the capability of those systems. And so it's easy to throw out the political jabs, but the reality is doing the work. We have to ensure that every voter has access to those absentee ballots. And then once they're returned, that you have the capability and capacity to process them in the time allocated in state law. And so, to make a sweeping statement that every state in the country could do whatever is just not the nature of our election system. We have 10,000 election officials across the country like me who are elected or appointed and are doing this work. It's very decentralized, and each state is unique. I will definitely agree with my opponent on the fact that each state probably views their elections through a political lens. I think we all do. But for me to go into a state, a blue state or a red state, and tell them how they should be doing their work is just not a good use of my time, and I don't think it inspires confidence.
Great, thank you. Craig?
Sure. So elections certainly are one of the more important things, but the Secretary of State does some other different things, so including overseeing registration of charities. What kind of roles does the Secretary of State's office play or should play in regulating these charities, especially given this year when we have a bunch of people raising money for COVID relief, fire relief, other disasters that seem to be cropping up about every 30 minutes. So what role should the Secretary of State's office play in that? Maybe I'll ask Gail first.
Thanks, Craig. I am the House Finance Chair. I have a very clear view into the responsibility of the Office of Secretary of State to register businesses, nonprofits, charitable organizations, to make sure that when that registration occurs, that they are complying with state laws, all kinds of state laws, and that continuation of their license does in fact be conditioned on their continued compliance with state laws and regulations that might pass the legislature or might be adopted by rulemaking. I think it's imperative that the legislature and the Office of the Secretary of State work with all of those entities to make sure that online licensing, online verification of the nature of their business, one-stop shopping on portals so that it is not difficult to register. The legislature worked with the Secretary of State's office and with the Department of Revenue. We passed legislation this past year that has been in the works for a number of years to change the way business licensing is made possible so that small businesses in particular, if they pay one registration fee and one licensing fee, they are then able to open up to 5 more franchises, small coffee shops, bakeries. You know, you can think about our communities who need access and love the community feel. That is going to be so important coming through this COVID crisis and dealing with economic activity in each community, allowing those small businesses to have that access to those licenses without having to open a new license and a new business. And I think I would also add, it is the responsibility of the Office of Secretary of State to make sure that those businesses, when they apply for re-registration, when they want to continue to do business in this state, that they have not been found criminal neglect, that they have not been brought to court, that they have not been in violation of labor laws, things like that. So we have an important responsibility to work with different state agencies and with the legislature, of course, to make sure our businesses are working and are working safely, securely, and legally in the state.
Okay, thank you very much. Kim?
Yeah, I think the most empowering tool that we can have with people looking at charitable contributions is giving them information and educating them, and that's one of the things we've really tried to do over the last 8 years in my office. And one of the things that we see, and I didn't really know that much about until I became Secretary of State, quite honestly, was we have organizations that do fundraising for charities, and I'm blanking completely right now at the term. There's an actual term for it that I can't think of, but where they are raising money on behalf of another charity, and we want our consumers to make informed decisions. And that's really the role of registering a corporation or a charity with the Secretary of State's office, is you want to provide that transparency to the public so they can see the annual report or see the board of directors for that organization. And you can also look at their level of charitable giving. So we do a report every year that shows the percentage of every dollar that goes to fundraising, or excuse me, to fundraising, or to those commercial fundraisers. There we go. And how much actually goes to the charity. And it's eye-opening. And it's not to be disparaging of commercial fundraisers, because there's some real benefit to nonprofits and charities across our state having that help raising money. But when an organization takes 98% of every dollar, or takes 105, we actually had a couple of charitable or commercial fundraisers who actually spent more money than they collected on behalf of these charities. When you inform the public of that, it empowers them to make good decisions. And it's an interesting line to walk in our office, because we don't have regulatory authority. We don't regulate the charities or the corporations that file with us, nor should we. Our job is to provide information. And that's why we do work closely with the Attorney General's office, particularly on things like these charitable giving scams. Oftentimes they are scams, very small number, but they are scams. We turn those over, and then they can do the investigation and prosecution.
Thank you very much.
Right. Another aspect of the job involves voter participation and registration. Kim, has your office done enough outreach in that regard?
I don't think you can ever do enough outreach in that regard. I mean, some would have the benchmark being 100% participation, which is a great goal. I don't think we'll ever get there, because turnout is really driven by what's on the ballot, and if the voter believes that their ballot's going to make a difference. But with that said, we have definitely put a huge focus on that, and try to get as much information out to voters as possible. It starts with our K through 12 programs on elections, and really trying to get young people to see the importance of voting, the importance of civic engagement. That's probably one of my highest priorities, is getting young people to see that their voice matters, and how do they vote. And we do mock elections. In fact, the mock election we do every year is one of our biggest participation events for young people in civic engagement, and we're really proud of it. But also, reaching out to high school and college students and being very proactive, again, to go and meet with them and show them what they need to do to register and vote and engage, how they learn about issues and candidates. We do the statewide voters pamphlet, trying to get one for the primary elections and try to get the funding for that, because I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of communities in those primaries where you're narrowing the field. You have no way to get information on the candidates that are in front of you. Timelines are our biggest challenge there besides funding. And then, I think it's just really working with our county partners and having outreach to direct communities. The most powerful education tools really are finding out what the needs and the barriers are in each of those communities and trying to overcome them. And I think that the counties are on the grounds and on the front lines there and do a really good job and, meeting those needs, from translation services to, citing ballot drop boxes. So yes, but there's always more we could do. Never going to be enough.
Gail, has the office done enough?
No, I don't think it has, which is why I initiated legislation in the last couple of years with my colleagues, and we finally got it across the finish line this year to actually look at addressing two elements of voter participation. And it's really important that we think about this because our state is one of the fastest growing states in the country. We have a large population of people who have come in just in the last 10 years. And we have, during the tenure of the Secretary of State, a virtual static in the number of people who are eligible age and are eligible to vote. They are citizens who are not registered to vote yet. And that's over 1 million people. And in a state of 7.6 million people with 4.6 million registered voters, if you have more than 1 million who are also eligible but aren't even registered, you aren't going to be turning them out to vote. And so we must pay attention to what are those real barriers. It's fine to say that you are identifying groups that you talk to, but you're still having a huge number of people who are not even registering. There are some barriers there, and we need to hear why. What is the barrier? What are the reasons why people are not registering to vote? And as a legislator for the past 7.5 years, I can see some of those barriers upfront and personal. I have seen people who have not gone into the DMV to get a driver's license because they were afraid that they would have to put their citizenship status on it. I have seen communities of color who have heard the attacks on their families and on their friends, and they have not felt safe going into a federal or a state facility to register to vote. So we had a piece of legislation, the Elections Funding Act, that would have extended substantial youth voter engagement, youth engagement before they are eligible to vote, communities of color outreach to disproportionately disenfranchised communities in this state. And that legislation actually passed to say the state, for the first time in decades, will be responsible for reimbursing the costs of local auditors, elections directors to conduct the state and federal elections in the even-numbered years. This impact will be freeing up resources that the local officials don't ordinarily have in order to do much more voter education, much more voter outreach. I have also been listening to groups around the state during this campaign, and they have said some really important and interesting things to me. Why is it so important that you have to go to a specific place to register, like get a license, go to the library? Why can't you register online? You can register online, except that many people don't know that. They don't know the opportunities. In addition, several have said, if the military can recruit in our high schools, shouldn't we be registering students? We now have pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds as a result of a law passed in the state legislature. And that idea, putting registration booths in high schools, in addition to how we have them on college campuses, all of these are ways in which we can hear the voices of the people who are not participating and set a goal for ourselves. It is not okay that more than 1 million Washingtonians who are eligible are not registered. Let's try to get that up to 80% of those people. If you set goals, you actually have a chance of getting there. If you don't set goals, you have no way of measuring your success.
Now, a follow-up on that, how does that percentage compare with 8 years ago?
It was 8 years ago when it was defined that more than 1 million voters, so it's basically not changed, okay? More than 1 million voters, if you look at the 2012 election, the 2016 election, and now going into the 2020 election for the presidential primary, the Secretary of State's office does give the statistics of how many are eligible, who actually registered, and how many registered voters, not eligible age voters or eligible voters, how many registered voters actually turned out.
And another follow-up on that, you mentioned legislative solutions or initiatives. So isn't much of this the job of the legislature, or then why?
It's fascinating that you asked that question. Every state executive has the authority and the responsibility, if they make it a funding priority, to bring state agency request legislation to the legislature. Okay, so if you want to expand voting participation and you want to expand voting rights and you want to expand voting access, it is absolutely a responsibility and a prerogative of a state executive to come to the legislature, and all of the state agencies do, by the way, including the Secretary of State. So where your priorities are determine whether or not you're asking for more money or more opportunities or more educational capacity, more staff. The Secretary of State's office comes to the legislature to get funding for Vote Law, our elections management and voter registration system, and for other activities, just like the business licensing I have pointed out. So yes, I expect state executives to come to the legislature, and as the House Finance Chair and a member of the Appropriations Committee, and a longtime member on the Technology and Economic Development Committee, Higher Ed Committee, as well as Transportation. It is the way we make sure we are supporting the needs of all the people in this state.
And Kim, have you made requests along those lines?
Oh, absolutely. A number of things, like I said, probably the one constant piece of legislation that I have had agency request is funding the primary printed primary pamphlet in every election cycle for the state, and it has never been funded, so we continue. But yes, one of the bills we had this last session was to eliminate the email or not fax return, but yeah, electronic return, there we go, of ballots for our military and overseas voters, which I know sounds very controversial, but it had to do with our cybersecurity threats, and we're concerned that we can't guarantee that an electronically transmitted voted ballot could be returned safely and securely. We have that provision in law, and unfortunately it didn't get out of committee. Also bringing back the unaffiliated voters in the presidential primary. That was a bill that we've been trying to get through, and and I think in the 2019 session, it did not get out of committee, or I don't know, I can't remember how far it went. But yes, I do agency request legislation, and we do weigh in on trying to make sure that our elections are very accessible and fair.
And over the past 8 years, has the percentage of registered voters gone up, or has it been stagnant?
It hasn't been stagnant. It has certainly gone up. We passed the 4 million mark a few years ago. We're at 4.7 million roughly right now, and that's climbing, and it will definitely climb by election day in November. We'll see a real surge, as we usually do in an election cycle, as people start getting closer to election day and realizing that they need to register and vote. And of course, because the legislature passed same-day registration and automatic registration and 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration, we've been working to implement those laws over the last couple of years. We're ready for those too, and we anticipate a pretty big surge on particularly same-day registration in November. We're going to do a lot of outreach and a lot of reminders to try to get people to register now and make sure that their information is up to date. I don't have the exact data that Representative Tarleton is pointing out right now. I will make sure I have that on my next interview. I can certainly get that to the board, but so I can't speak to it specifically, but yes, our registered voters totals have been increasing during my tenure.
And speaking of the legislative requests, Gail, what would be your priority? What would be the first thing you would request of the legislature if you're Secretary of State?
Yes, I want to make sure that there is implementation of the Election Security Breaches Act and the Election Funding Act that we passed this past session, primarily because the Elections Funding Act did actually have resources for youth engagement, voter engagement, communications materials that could be tailored at each local jurisdiction to the voter population, making sure that we are funding our elections properly, the state and federal elections, so that the local auditors can in fact produce the voter pamphlet statements. And actually, the legislature in the 2020 session did determine, and we passed into law, that voter pamphlet statements must be printed and distributed for both the August election and the general election in every county now, starting in 2021. And so therefore the even numbered years would be 2022. So working to get the funding is essential. The other thing I am going to request is for making sure that we implement the state or federal laboratory that will be testing our elections equipment, systems, voter files for vulnerabilities and performance standards before they can be deployed. We can no longer be moving technology and integrated systems for voter registration or for elections management into the field, into our 39 counties, without understanding the potential vulnerabilities that they have to different kinds of cyber threats, to different kinds of attacks, to different kinds of security practices that might make them more vulnerable. That is the first time in the country that we passed this kind of legislation, and it was really important for one reason. There are very few manufacturers of elections equipment and systems in this country, and one of the companies has 50% of the market nationally. It is the kind of vulnerability that foreign actors, as well as domestic actors and hostile parties, want to look at. How do they make access possible? And usually it's through the equipment and the networks. And so I'll want to implement those, and voter participation, securing our elections.
Kim, how thoroughly do we test for vulnerabilities in the system?
Very thoroughly. So going back to the tabulation systems, actually in Washington State, it is a requirement that they are certified nationally by the EAC. That's a federal requirement too. And then also the NIST, the National Institute of, I can't remember NIST, the test standard
and technology.
Yeah. That's the one. So we've always had that, and we actually certify those systems here in our state also before they can be used. And any updates or modifications to those systems have to be tested by our office as well. Beyond that, and I'm trying to remember what the question was. Oh, just in terms of cybersecurity, that has been our focus for decades, quite honestly, here in the office. But certainly there's been a focus in the last 4 years on a totally different level. We were scanned in 2016 by Russians. We detected it at the time it happened, reported it to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, and had it confirmed later. We thought it was a foreign actor. We had it confirmed later that it was, in fact, Russia. And really what we've spent the last 4 years doing is building our partnerships with our federal partners like Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. We were actually a founding member of the EIISAC, and now let me see if I get this acronym correct. This is an information sharing center that we have monitors now around our system and around the county election system, the VoteWA system, that is reporting the traffic. It's not keeping your data, but it's reporting the traffic that we're seeing through it, and that's being aggregated at a national level and shared out. So when we see a site in Iran that's attacking every election office in the country, we can be notified and we can block those IP addresses and keep them out of our systems. And then I think the really important thing for people to know is that we've spent a lot of time coming up with our plans. We have continuity of operation plans that are for cybersecurity and other events like a pandemic that each county has been working on and we've been working on, and we were really ready for the pandemic as a result. We've also built the first in the country Election Security Operations Center, or SOC, and that has really allowed us to support the counties in ways we couldn't have done 4 years ago. So we now have a cyber team of experts. They are monitoring our system and really keeping those defenses up and making sure that the bad actors are staying out. We're educating our county election officials and testing them. We're partnering with the Washington National Guard and the Department of Homeland Security to do robust testing on our system and on those county systems to give them feedback on potential vulnerabilities or real vulnerabilities. So we're doing that. We, in fact, got about $20 million worth of grants from the EAC about earlier this year on cybersecurity. And because we had done these assessments, we could give that money to the counties and they knew exactly where to direct it, which was really a powerful tool and really helpful for them. And then beyond that, we've done tabletop exercises. So we walk through what happens when this happens 3 days before the election? What happens when malware takes over your system and you have ransomware holding it hostage? How are you going to respond? And I think what I'm most proud of that we've really accomplished in all of this planning is that now we not only have ways to protect and defend our systems, we have plans to respond and recover in case there is an event, because at the end of the day, there is no finish line to cybersecurity. And, we have to be right 100% of the time, every single day, every hour, every minute, and they just have to get it right once. So, this is an effort that's a real team effort with the counties and the state, and we're working really hard to make sure our elections are safe.
No, and Gail, you have a background in cybersecurity. Have you ever run an election before?
I've not run an election, and we have 39 county auditors who run our elections in this state. I have a long background in intelligence, national security, briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, running technology programs for the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, in Russia and Ukraine, as well as in the United States and in the intelligence community. And very importantly, I have a long background dealing with the ways in which we prepare for disasters, the way we work through emergency management. As a Port of Seattle commissioner, I led a regional effort to ensure that we were working in the Area Maritime Security Committee, led by the Coast Guard, with the Department of Homeland Security, with the Defense and intelligence agencies, and with all of the intelligence community and the FBI, to ensure that we had the ability to respond to foreign or domestic threats to our airports and seaports. We made sure we were responding to natural disasters. At the University of Washington, I worked with federal partners in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense to establish centers of excellence in both cybersecurity assurance as well as in an Institute for National Security Education and Research to prepare students and faculty to support and actually pursue jobs in the intelligence field to protect our country against any kinds of threats. The job has changed. And we have never faced a situation. I've been voting for 43 years. I have been in the national security field for nearly 40 years now. I started in 1980 with my first top secret security clearance in the Department of Treasury as a part-time college senior. And I can tell you this, when we are looking at both foreign and domestic threats combined to the way in which we conduct our elections and secure our democracy against any kind of interference, it's not just the physical attack. It is the undermining of confidence that when we get through the attack, when we are dealing with the situations that disrupt our access to the ballot, like attacks on the Postal Service that the Trump administration has been conducting now for nearly 6 months, it erodes people's confidence that their vote will be counted. And that is exactly what authoritarian regimes want. They want to undermine confidence in democratic institutions. I have been studying the Soviet Union and the Russian history and politics and economics since I was 16. I spent 8 years working in Russia. I know that our state and our country are dealing with a nature of threat for the foreseeable future that is very different than anything we have ever encountered before. And that is why I decided I had to run for this office. Listen, I I've worked in the private sector, the public sector. I have 25 years of public service in my background. I represent a fantastic district in the legislature, and we work with countries around the world to secure our ports and to secure our communities and to deal with climate threats like we are experiencing every single day. But I know this, our democracy is at risk. And that is why I am running for this office. And you know, Greg, I may not have met you before today, and I may not have been able to meet each one of you before today, but I have been in Vancouver dozens and dozens of times, the southwest of Washington. I love this state. I know every single part of this state. I have traveled around this state over decades of working at UW and visiting here as a tourist before we moved here, fishing here on the Olympic Peninsula. This is everything. Our democracy is at stake, and we cannot take for granted that elections will work. And today, the former director of national intelligence for President Trump went to Congress, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times and said, we need a bipartisan commission right now to monitor our elections right now against foreign and domestic attacks. When that,
I think that's a bit
says
specifically beyond the purview of the Washington Secretary of State. But Ben or Craig, any questions?
Sure, I'll make it a little bit lighter here, I hope at least. So with a two-part question, do either of you plan to vote for President Trump? And then name a politician or an elected official that you admire and why. And Kim, do you want to start?
Yes, I'll start. In the 27 years I've done elections, I've never publicly said who I'm going to vote for president. Not going to change that performance now. I would say I have a short list of 5 of politicians, if you will, that I admire, and I would have to go with Reagan. Ronald Reagan. And he's the reason I'm a Republican. He inspired me when I first voted the very first time in 1980, and has ever since.
Okay, Gail?
And I do not plan to vote for President Trump. And I admire a number of people. Did you say we had to say a president or that an elected official?
No, just any elected official. So you could choose Troy Kelly for all I can care about.
I asked him to resign. I have great admiration for the late Senator Slade Gorton, and it is for both a personal reason as well as a professional reason. He was instrumental in setting up and conducting the 9/11 Commission after the 9/11 attacks. I was working in mostly in Washington, D.C. at the time of the 9/11 attacks, and commuting back and forth from Seattle, and working on site at an intelligence agency. And his expertise and his demeanor in providing the framework for how we analyze the complexity and the consequences of the 9/11 attacks, the reforms and restructuring of the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the relationship with Congress that had to happen. It was an extraordinary thing to witness, and it required the diplomacy and the knowledge and the skills of an extraordinary person. And my personal connection is that I grew up down the road from Gloucester, Mass, and we would go to Gorton's of Gloucester seafood manufacturing facility as a field trip every year growing up to see how the fish sticks that we ate in school every Friday were made. And I never knew that it was that family until I had to introduce him at an event when I was a port commissioner. And I did this research and I was like, oh no, I actually know Gorton's of Gloucester. So that is why.
That's a cool connection. Thank you.
Totally unexpected.
Great. We'll move on then. Give us your final pitch. Take 1 to 2 minutes, your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements. And we'll start with Gail.
So I've had 13 years in public office, and I've been honored to serve the people of Washington State as a Port of Seattle commissioner and nearly 8 years as a state legislator. Seeking statewide office in a pandemic is a reminder to all of us that we are trying to accomplish the work of the people with the best of our ability, despite all of the odds. We need to take into consideration that the work of our state means that we need to protect our right to vote. When our right to vote is protected, every vote is protected. The people will then believe that the results of elections are legitimate and that they can believe that the representatives that they elect are doing the work that they are duly elected to perform. I have been very concerned as a legislator that we're not addressing the nature of the risks to our democracy as they were evolving. As a national security expert, I really do see that the nature of the threats from domestic or foreign parties will continue to evolve because there are hostile parties who do not want our democracy to work. We also need to think about our state. We are moving into a whole new decade of the 21st century. We are having tens of thousands of people move to our state every single year. Close to, on average, 75 to 80,000 have been moving here in the last 10 years. We are now looking at being 9 million people. Participating in your democracy is the reason why we are unique in this country, and our state should make that access to democracy available for all of our people if they are eligible to vote. And I would be truly honored to have your endorsement because we have a lot of work to do, and I will look forward to the opportunity to do that for the people of Washington.
Great, thank you, Kim.
Yes, so I'm seeking your endorsement because of my my track record and my history and job-related performance. I think that one of the most important aspects of being Secretary of State is trustworthiness, and I believe that my experience and my leadership and my integrity that I've demonstrated as Secretary of State and as County Auditor and Election Director before that really is why you should endorse me and why people should vote for me. And I think that the best demonstration of that is the bipartisan nature of the endorsements that I have. And they're wide. They include unions. They include more conservative or traditional Republican supporters. And I think when you look at the election officials, particularly when you look at election officials who've actually run elections, secretaries of state, county auditors, and state elections directors, when you look at those, it's bipartisan support. I have the support of over 50 Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of is not only do I have the 3 former Republican secretaries of state from Washington State, I've received the endorsements of the Michigan Secretary of State and the former Oregon Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson and Phil Kiesling. And that comes from doing the job and the way you do the job. And so this is what I really, I guess, want to end with is that I'm really proud of what we built here in Washington. Arguably, we have the most accessible and secure voting system in the country. It's the reason that the country is turning to Washington and asking how we do things here so they can improve their elections. And that's a testament to the hard work that the legislature has done and county auditors and the Secretary of State's office has done through the decades. And I've been part of that. And I'm proud of that work. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. And I'm proud of what Washington has accomplished going into the November election. So I ask for the endorsement of the Columbian, and I appreciate your consideration.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Nice speaking with you.
Yes, you as well. Take care. Thank you.
Take care, Ralph.